long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series. My name is constant reader Scott Daly, and as always, I am joined by my co-host and fortune-telling sex demon, Matt Freeman. Matt, how's it going?
It's going well. I'm pretty lonely out here in this stone circle. Nobody's been here for a few years, and I'm kind of wondering how exactly my life is supposed to operate. Like, what are the rules? Anyway, I'm doing great, ready to talk about these two chapters. This story just keeps kind of taking new directions every chapter, and it's kind of endlessly surprising, and that makes it very fun and rewarding to keep reading.
Yeah, this week on the show, we are going to be covering chapters 2 and 3 of the Dark Tower, Book 1, The Gunslinger. Roland, dying of thirst, stumbles upon a way station in the middle of the desert where he meets a young boy named Jake, who comes from a city of tall buildings and metal vehicles called New York? Taking Jake with him, the two finally manage to get out of the desert, and after out-sexing a sex demon, they run into the man in black and chase him into the mountains. So, Matt, what'd you think? What do you think? You said the story's changing directions. Do you like the direction it's going?
I think so, yeah. I mean, basically the first chapter was kind of solidly situated in this Western gunslinger context. And then we move into this interesting, like, old grizzled man and his young protege almost sort of milieu for a little while. We then get this flashback to what? New York City? What's happening? And then the mountains are just this entirely kind of other interesting thing where it's like magic and sorcery and almost like more. There've been fantasy elements all along, but this is a much I would call it a more fantasy tone than we've had up to this point, because Roland is doing things that are pretty magical seeming, like unambiguously.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it makes me feel like, oh, this is just a fun book because I can't really predict where we're going or like what it's going to feel like from chapter to chapter.
Yeah, and I think that is a fun part of especially the early books, and kind of as King is opening up the world and teaching you more about it and what's going on here and what it all means. That's really one of the more fun things. And of course, the thing that I enjoy the most is Stephen King as a writer of characters, and we finally get to meet another one of our characters here. Like we had some different characters in the first chapter, but Allie was mostly like a side character. We're still not sure about the man in black, but here we meet and really get to know this kid. Mm-hmm. We get to know Jake.
Yeah, and Jake's great. I can't wait to get to Jake.
Yeah. So let's just go ahead and do that then. Let's get started. Before we get started, I just wanted to personally say thank you so much to all the positive reception we got on the first episode. It was great to see. We had people emailing us. We had people on the Doof Media subreddit. We had people in the comments on the YouTube channel and people in our Doof Media Discord chat. Everyone was very positive about the show. It was great and very exciting to see. We are so excited about this project, and it's great to see y'all out there are excited too.
Yeah, I agree. And also, as we were building up toward this, I was like, what if I don't really like the story? I mean, I think that's always going to be a question when you're starting a project like this. And at this point, we're a few chapters in and I'm really enjoying it. And I'm not worried about that anymore.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for those of you that shared it with friends, that shared it on Reddit, that filled out reviews like we asked at the end of last chapter. Thank you. And welcome. Hope we have some fun this week as well.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get into chapter 2, which is titled The Way Station. We open the chapter with Roland still wandering the desert. 16 days have passed since he left Brown Bombadil behind. He's out of water and dying of thirst. He's forgotten the name of Brown's crow, Zoltan, and he is patiently awaiting the first time he's going to fall down. And we open this chapter with a nursery rhyme that is looping through his head. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it starts, "The rain in Spain falls on the plain. There is joy and also pain, but the rain in Spain falls on the plain." And of course ends with, we walk it in love, but fly in chains, and the plains in Spain fall in the rain. And Roland notes that he doesn't know what a plane is.
Yeah.
But this is a nursery rhyme. And I just want to specify here, the very first part of this rhyme is part of a speech exercise that was popularized in the stage and movie adaptation of Pygmalion, which is called My Fair Lady. It's a great musical. My wife absolutely loves it. Basically that first line, "The rain in Spain falls on the plain," is the only thing that comes from that, and then the rest of this poem is just a complete invention of King. And it becomes really interesting when you look at it in that context.
Yeah, I knew the rhyme sounded vaguely familiar, but I had no idea where from. So pretty much everything after that first line is made up. So if we just kind of pick through it, we've got like, "There is joy and also pain, time's a sheet and life's a stain. All those things we know will change and all those things remain the same." And then there's mad or sane. And so there's this delightful like duality, this oppositional framing of concepts. There's like change and the same, mad and sane, joy and pain. I don't know what it's doing exactly or why, but that's clearly the theme that he's written this poem around is duality and opposites.
Yeah. And I think that's going to become really interesting when we really get into Jake and the thing that Jake represents to Roland and his quest. I love the one of the last lines, "We walk in love but fly in chains." That's really interesting to me. And I think that's going to pay off later. Yeah,
I mean it makes you think things, but nothing that I'm concrete enough about to want to talk about. So, but yeah, we'll probably come back to it, I imagine.
I think
we should have like a nursery rhyme corner at the end of the show where we're like, how does the nursery rhymes relate to the story?
Yeah, because that's what we learn about this one, right? This is another nursery rhyme that Roland says that this is one that his mom sung to him.
Right, yeah. So again, we have another, it's similar to that Spark a Dark rhyme from last time. That one was one that he was saying voluntarily. This one's a bit more intrusive. It does make a degree of sense that a guy dying of thirst would be obsessing about rain, but the poem is clearly about more than just rain. It's about all these other concepts.
Yeah, I mean, I like the part where like he's singing this nursery rhyme and the meaning of it is lost on him because he doesn't know what a plane is. He doesn't know where Spain is. These are things that make sense to us, the reader, but to Roland, it's just kind of nonsense that came from his mother. That was just like sometimes we don't think about the nursery rhymes that are passed down to us, right? Like "Ring Around the Rosie" not being a fun thing at all.
Yeah.
But kids don't know the meaning of it. They just recite it over and over again, and it becomes imprinted in your head.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what this one is.
I just had this idea that Jabberwocky is actually like a real thing that's like a terrible warning for some people in some fantasy world far away.
That's really great. I love that.
So the last thing about this section is I'm hung up on this idea that he forgot the crow. Is it a crow or a raven?
It's a raven.
He forgot the raven Zoltan's name, and then he's going to remember it later. And I mean, on the surface level, it just means like, oh, he's dehydrated, and he's fallen apart, and he's going to forget names. But I don't know. For some reason, to me, this raven sticks out to me as being more important than just like it's just some raven. Who cares? I don't know. Maybe I'm making too much of it, but I feel like it wouldn't be mentioned again here if it wasn't kind of important in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly true that it is, despite the surface level understanding that a person dying of thirst is kind of losing their mind a little bit and not thinking properly, that ties in. But yeah, I mean, I think it sells kind of the magic of Brown and the weird stuff that he's going through. I mean, we've been talking about how time is soft in this world, and like the amount of like he knows specifically it's been 16 days, which is like one of the first definitive measurements of time we get in this book. But it seems like even in that feeling of 16 days, it seems like time's gone by much, much faster. Because, it is very interesting. And I love that moment where it just pops back into his head and he's like, oh, Zoltan, of course. It seems really interesting.
Yeah, totally.
This, regardless of any of that, though, it is just another kind of weird anachronism, right? We're talking about Spain and planes. And in this chapter, I think we finally get an answer about maybe where all these anachronisms are coming from. Kind of a suggestion, right? A concept that, hey, there's Earth is a thing. Yeah. What that has to do with this place, how you get between there and here. We also maybe get some hints as to that, but nothing is I wouldn't say spelled out for us. I think you can probably guess at this point, but yeah. So we do in this moment get to see a little bit more of Roland's mother and court, just some more stuff in his past. We're going to get a whole lot more of that coming up pretty soon in this chapter. But one thing I wanted to point out, a quote that really jumped out to me, was this idea that Roland's mother did not sing to him at night. This was a nursery rhyme she sang to him during his day naps, because all those born of the high speech must face the darkness alone. And we're going to learn a little bit more about the high speech going forward, but it seems like something more important than just a language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I probably read that as like it's kind of a euphemistic way of saying all those born of the nobility, perhaps. That was kind of, or maybe even just all those born of like the gunslinger caste or whatever. Yeah, I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, I think that would be fair. Yeah. So before we move on, I wanted to talk in this early part of this chapter about the defeated nature of Roland. I remember the line that really spoke to you back in last week's episode was where Brown explicitly like doubts Roland's ability to catch the Man in Black. He says, "You're never going to catch him." And Roland just responds with utmost confidence and surety, "I'll catch him." And now it's 16 days later, and that Roland is gone, and it's replaced by this one. And I think the writing here is beautiful. About an hour later, he fell down and skinned his hands. He looked at the tiny beads of blood on his faked skin with disbelief. The blood looked no thinner. It looked like any blood now dying in the air. It seemed almost as smug as the desert. He dashed the drops away, hating them blindly. Smug? Why not? The blood was not thirsty. The blood was being served. The blood was being made sacrifice unto. Blood sacrifice. All the blood needed to do was run and run and run. He looked up at the splotches that had landed on the hard pan and watched as they were sucked up with uncanny suddenness. How do you like that, blood? How does that suit you? So we go from this absurdly confident man to a man that is almost without hope and just like looking at himself bleed and yelling at the blood. I love the desperation of this moment.
Yeah, he's losing it. It's this really fantastic image. Like he really can't afford to be bleeding right now. And here the very environment is just hungrily sucking up the blood that he sheds. And he's thinking of the blood as smug and almost like the blood is laughing at him. I think maybe the main thing being emphasized here is how alone and isolated he is, because like you don't start talking to inanimate objects unless you're unless loneliness and isolation are kind of one of the primary things that's going on with you, right?
Yeah. And I love after that moment, we see like one of the first moments in the book, I think, where we've had Roland kind of speak to himself, because there's an italicized sentence after that says, "Oh, Jesus, I'm far gone." Mm-hmm. And this admission that I'm screwed. This is it. It's over. But it's not quite over. Right.
So so he thinks Jesus to himself. Doesn't he also think gods at other times, like as an epithet? Or is it
like plural?
I may be wrong. I'm doing the audiobook, so sometimes I hear things that may not be there. But anyway, I just thought it was interesting that he uses Jesus as an epithet, which I don't remember him doing before. He might have. I just wanted to.
I believe "by the gods" is something that is said in the book. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, it's just this interesting idea that he kind of mixes and matches his religious oaths.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So Roland looks up, and then finally in the distance, as if appearing by magic, he sees what we will later learn as the titular way station. There, he spots, as he's walking up, he spots what he first confuses as the Man in Black himself, but who we learn a little bit later is Jake Chambers. I really like this moment where in his deliriousness, Roland can't even process what the hell's going on. He confuses Jake for the Man in Black, and then it's like, what is he, shrunk? How is this possible? And it's just another moment where this badass gunslinger that Roland absolutely is, and most of what we saw last chapter is just been utterly defeated. Like he just like passes out.
Yeah.
Suddenly.
Yeah. It's a wonderfully not badass moment.
Yes.
He runs up to him in this like shambling, undignified, like gallop. And then draws down on him like at close range with the pistol, and he's like flustered and out of control and like seeming insane. Like it makes you wonder, like, what if it had been the Man in Black and he had approached him in this sort of completely unprepared and disorganized fashion? I mean,
he would have been screwed.
Yeah,
and like he almost would have been screwed just from Jake, because we learn a little bit later that Jake's like, I was going to kill you, and then I decided I shouldn't. And it's like he totally could have. Like he was passed out for, I mean, we don't know exactly how long, but long enough for Jake to grab a weapon and stab him with it.
Right.
Or use his own gun on him.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think King goes out of his way to make it clear how, so I guess one thing I'll say, like stepping back, framing this whole chapter, I would say like chapter 2 is the let's humanize Roland a little bit chapter.
Sure.
Because he was very like arm's length the whole first chapter. He keeps his decorum up the entire time. And in the very, we're at the very beginning of this chapter, he's already completely lost his decorum. He's flailing around and collapsing and needing to be taken care of by a little boy. And it just, it kind of brings him down to his level. Brings him down to our level, and makes him a little bit more sympathetic of a character, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then the brilliant thing King does with that is then take that and then kind of destroy it in where he's taking this Jake Roland relationship.
Yeah, definitely. Like I think that, and then that's chapter 3 where he plays with that. So yeah. Yeah.
Something that stood out to me a lot on this particular reread, though, was Roland's reaction when he feels like he's finally caught and is about to confront the Man in Black. Specifically, it says he doesn't feel elation, he doesn't feel fear, or any of the feelings you think he'd feel. He only is focusing on how guilty he feels about being mad at his own blood. And the nursery rhyme, "The rain in Spain falls mostly on the plain," is still echoing through his head. And I know he's delirious. Like, I think this does good to emphasize his deliriousness. But I think this is another moment where even about to catch up to his quarry, Roland can't stop thinking about the stuff that's behind him.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. Yeah. I think him being delirious is what's functionally causing his guard to be let down and letting us see who he really is here. And the fact that he feels inappropriate shame basically at his stupid inner thoughts and inner monologue. It is a perfectly human thought process to feel that way. It's surprising coming from this put together badass Roland, only because it reveals his humanity more than he tends to let show through.
Sure.
But like, and also like you would expect the hero of the story to feel either success or some sort of predictable heroic emotion when they catch the evil guy, but he feels like confusion. Basically, he feels nonsense emotions, which again make you feel like, well, it's probably how a real person would react in this situation. So
sure. Yeah, we think we learn in this section that it's been 12 years. He's been chasing this man for 12 years, and in this moment he thinks he's going to catch him and doesn't even feel the excitement of that. And I think it's just part of it is also, I think, just like almost setting up this idea that Roland is just doing this because he just doesn't know what else to do. Like that this is just like, he's just chasing this man because on some level he's always been chasing him 12 years.
Yeah. I think we'll talk later about more specifically about the idea that we don't really know exactly why he's chasing him, but because it's not something Roland thinks about anymore. You're right. It's kind of just become the background of what he's doing.
Yeah.
Like it's Ka willed it or something. I don't know.
Sure.
We'll see.
Sure. When Roland awakes, though, Jake Chambers, or Bama, as he's called, which I think is a fun little beat that kind of keeps us positioned in our Western story. I just think like a nickname like Bama just feels a little Westerny.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
But Jake Chambers is standing over Roland, offering him water and food. Jake doesn't remember how he got here in the middle of nowhere, but he does remember that the Man in Black passed by 1 or 2 weeks ago, or 3 poops, as Jake describes it. So this is evidence, finally, that Roland is indeed gaining on the Man in Black.
This kid needs more fiber. Jeez.
Yeah. I agree with that. Like, I mean, I guess you're not eating that much. You're not going to poop that much.
I mean, I was more seriously thinking like, okay, he does have the water pump, but he's probably going to slowly starve to death. He kind of, at some point in here, he's like, he gave Roland most of the rest of his food. So
yeah, I gave you all my food and you're going to leave me.
Yeah.
That's what he says. Yeah. So I love how King kind of draws this character almost immediately. Like Jake is not speaking like Roland does. And we see here how King uses like the Roland type speech to emphasizing words like cassock, and then saying things like "tell me for your father's sake" to kind of highlight the difference between the ways they speak, because Jake is talking like an American boy from the 1980s.
Yeah.
And then suddenly in his conversation, he's talking about seeing movies in Times Square and watching channels on the TV, and a statue that's sitting out in the water of a lady that's wearing a crown and holding a book. And we, the reader, gets this immediately. Like, we don't know where here is, but we know we're there, the there that Jake is talking about from. It's the late 20th century. It's New York City. And one of the things I was most curious about when we started this book, Matt, was what your reaction to this was going to be.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's like partly because I saw the trailer for the Dark Tower movie at some point, but like I was pretty much instantly sure, regardless of that like, oh, this kid is just from Earth. Like even like you said, just from the way he talks before he even starts talking about taxis and Statue of Liberty, the way he talks makes it evident that he's just not from around here. Like every possible writing choice in terms of how he's portrayed makes him out of place relative to this setting.
Sure.
Yeah, he just doesn't talk like these people. Another thing that I'm thinking at this point is, so we just saw that Roland is basically going crazy with isolation. He's yelling at his blood and so forth. The last human contact that he had was this confession that he murdered all of the human contact that he had prior to that. So basically, like, as a human being, he's just desperate for human connection and human contact. And he's also literally dying. And then this kid shows up, and it's very suspicious because we know that the man in black kind of lays traps for Roland. And the idea that this boy is another trap pretty quickly becomes textual, I think. It's literally textual by the end of this, this couple of chapters. And the nature of this trap is just so incredibly fiendish that I love it. It's just, this is a kid that Roland is just sure to love instantly. And the man in black is going to use that against him.
Yeah, and he does love him almost instantly. Like, I think the text says the moment that he comes out of the basement with the food, and like Jake, terrified for him, comes up and hugs him, he's like, well, this is it. Yeah. I love him. And then, he almost immediately attached to that is like, oh, the man in black must be cackling, because this is exactly what he wanted. Like, of course he was meant to love the boy. Was there ever a trap to match the trap of love? Which is a perfect line, and I think summarizes so much of Roland so well.
Yeah, his mindset, right?
Yeah.
Also, this is one instance where, like, we talked about the idea that, I think last week, actually, we talked about the idea that the man in black could probably kill Roland if he wanted to, but he just that doesn't seem to be what he wants to do at all, because, and here we have this instance where he's sort of led Roland to this way station where there's a water pump. And I mean, that's not necessarily evidence that he is intentionally sparing Roland's life, but I don't know. It seems a little bit suspicious that, like, he leads him directly to this place where he's going to find the ability to keep himself alive longer.
Yeah, and find this boy that he brought here,
right,
as we'll learn pretty soon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So we learn that the longer Jake has been sitting at the way station, the less he can remember about his world before. But Roland has a special way of making that remember. He pulls out a bullet and begins to kind of dance it across his knuckles, which eventually hypnotizes Jake into like sort of a trance. And then the next little bit we go into is kind of the story of Jake Chambers. Before we do that, though, there's this part as he's doing this that I really want to focus on, because he's spinning it and he's thinking to himself, did this have to be part of it? Yes, it did. There was a certain cold beauty to it. And as he's kind of watching the kid go to sleep, suddenly he like gets really aggressively like disgusted with this whole process. He says, not for the first time, the gunslinger tasted the smooth, loaden taste of soul sickness. The shell in his fingers, manipulated with such unknown grace, was suddenly horrific. The spore of a monster. He dropped it into his palm, made a fist, and squeezed it with painful force. Had it exploded in that moment, he would have rejoiced at the destruction of his talented hand, for its only true talent was murder. There had always been murder in the world, but telling himself so was no comfort. There was murder, there was rape, there were unspeakable practices, and all of them were for the good, the bloody myth, for the grail, for the tower. Ah, the tower stood somewhere in the middle of things, so they did say, rearing its black-gray bulk to the sky. And in his desert-scored ears, the gunslinger heard the sweet sound of his mother's voice. Chusset, chisset, chasset, bring enough to fill your basket. So, like, we could talk about this one part for like 20 minutes because there's so much here, Matt. But like, I just love this idea that he's doing this thing and he's disgusted by it. He's disgusted by the act. He's disgusted by himself. He's disgusted that this boy is here now. This boy has been sucked into this thing. Roland chose to be here. Roland chose to chase the man in black, but this boy did not choose it. And as part of this, he thinks back to Allie of Tull, how she didn't choose it either. And I love that he says, but at least she was of this world. This kid isn't even of this world. And now he's here now and part of it. And I have to be part of this. I have my role to play in this, and it's going to involve this kid, and he hates it. He hates it.
Yeah, this is one of the more humanizing moments of the chapter, I would say, where like for the first time we see this crack in his kind of single-minded devotion, where he has this conflict within himself concerning the fact that he is this badass gunslinger killer. And then so also, you know, we have this idea of memory and the past framed through the nursery rhymes that he's remembering as he goes through this process. And, you know, it's interesting because this thing that Roland is doing seems like some kind of possibly magical hypnotism. And it doesn't seem like a violent act that he's doing, other than the fact that he's using a bullet to do it. But like, he's blown people away. He's drawn his gun on people. But the thing that causes him to have this like spasm of conscience is the fact that he's doing this kind of hypnotism on the kid. It prompts this extremely strong reaction, this like revulsion at his own nature. And also not just at his own nature, but like revulsion at the injustice and unfairness of the world and of the whole path that he's on.
Yeah. I love that there had always been murder in the world, murder and all the stuff for the sake of the tower. And this is, of course, the first time the tower has been mentioned in the story so far. I think it's fair to say you guessed there was going to be some sort of tower in the Dark Tower book series.
Yeah, I gathered. But what is funny is he drops the tower in the Grail right next to it, and you're like, okay, the Grail. Right. I immediately connect that to the Holy Grail. Remember that this is like Roland, and he's sort of a Crusader knight, but I don't want to assume too much necessarily. The Holy Grail was like a cup of blood, so there's some like sacrifice and blood imagery there. But there's this fascinating concept buried in here where he's like all of the horrible violence in the world is for the good, for the Grail, for the tower. And I'm like, okay, so perhaps I'm misunderstanding, but it's almost like he's hinting at the mythology or the moral underpinnings of his world. And when I say his world, I'm not sure if I mean Roland's personal worldview or if I mean like the actual way that this world operates. It could kind of be either one.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. Yeah. And we will learn much more about that as we go, of course. Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, it is not an accident that King, the first time we mentioned the tower, the Dark Tower, it is paired with the Grail, and a thing that was long sought after and long quested. Yeah, for.
and bloody sacrifice and disgust and self-hatred and all these things are like the same paragraph, right? Yeah.
And I mean, we'll learn later. This is kind of jumping ahead. We'll learn later that the thing Roland wants the man in black for, he wants to ask him where the tower is. And so we're kind of getting this idea that his quest is for that tower. And he seemingly hates it, right? Like the tower, all this awfulness in the world is for the sake of this tower. And yet he wants to find it.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's going to be really interesting.
I guess I just wanted to draw the idea that he scrapes his hand and he thinks of it as a blood sacrifice. And then we we have this image of the Grail here. I kind of mentally connect those two things.
I also love just that had the bullet exploded when he squeezed it, he would have rejoiced. He would have rejoiced at the removal. He's a gunslinger. Like his hand is like his thing. Yeah, and he would have been happy to lose it in that moment.
At least in that moment, right?
Yeah.
Which I think that's the crucial bit is like the fact that we're seeing this fleeting crack into his conflict and his humanity is what makes this so compelling. Because like right after this, he kind of just goes back to being how he was before, very solid, and he would never think something like that normally. Yeah. So Jake tells the story in this trance
of a typical morning in New York City as he leaves his apartment and walks to school. Suddenly, out of nowhere, he is pushed into oncoming traffic by none other than the man in black himself. He gets hit by a car and dies and ends up at the way station. So what do you think about that?
Yeah. It's funny being in this position as you know, in this role on the show, because it forces me to like look at assumptions that I make while reading and then ask where they come from. Whereas normally I would just kind of just breeze right by.
Sure.
So at this point, I assume the man in black is like some kind of magical wizard who can step between worlds, because we know that he's both in this world and in New York City. I assume that he can push people between worlds, probably by killing them, but not necessarily. I don't know, because like toward the end of the chapter, we're not really sure where they're going, but I think maybe it's Earth. But anyway, this definitely leads credence to this idea that Roland's land is the afterlife, because the kid dies and then he shows up here. But I also don't think it's as simple as that, because it seems like Roland was born here. I mean, he was born in Gilead, but we don't know the relationship between those places. But he definitely didn't. There's no indication that he had to die to come here, although maybe he did. I don't know. So anyway, I think what I'm picking up is like these worlds are connected, or maybe they're not even worlds in the way that I'm thinking. And the connections aren't straightforward. But I think by the end of this chapter, maybe we have a clearer view of it, but I still don't have a solid sense of it. It depends. I have a feeling like the end of chapter 3 and the beginning of chapter 4 are going to resolve some questions for me. That's my feeling right now.
Okay. Interesting. Cool.
So I just want to take like a minute to talk about this delightful, sickening little short story that is Jake's backstory.
Yeah, it's great, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is really Stephen King at his best. He loves to dive into the details with some of these stories. Like Jake's a fairly important character in this book, but he will do this with just about every character. He will like dive into this kind of backstory on them and define them and flesh them out in a really interesting way. And often in a horrible way, because the detail with which he describes Jake being hit by the car is awful.
Yeah, right. It's as graphic as you could possibly not want.
Yeah.
And not just that bit. Obviously, that bit is very Stephen King feeling and horrifying. But like the way the narration kind of branches out from Jake and describes his father and his like just the kind of professionalism and inhumanity that surrounds him and how this has shaped him. And then I really love the writing, because as we continue through these chapters, King will reference back to these small elements in this flashback, right? In ways that are really, really effective. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, some of it is so good. Like he doesn't know this yet, but he hates all professional people. He hasn't learned to hate himself yet, but he will. It's really interesting, right? Because we're basically the framing of this story is Roland has hypnotized Jake and says, "Tell me what happened." And then Jake is speaking out loud and telling Roland what happened to him. But textually, all this other stuff we're learning about Jake, Roland is learning. And I think it's really interesting because he basically, the way King describes it is it's like stuff that is kind of bleeding through or seeping through the story anyway, and described as enough for the gunslinger to make out its shape. So this is magic, kind of. This is not just simple, like he's really, really quick with a bullet and therefore staring enough at a bullet like kind of zonks you out a little bit. He's doing some kind of ritual or magic spell. Yeah,
I think so. Ever since you mentioned that King kind of wanted to write his version of Lord of the Rings, I keep seeing these connections, even if they're not necessarily there. So I'm going to say that Roland is magic, but also that it's his kind of magic is distinct somehow from the magic of the Man in Black. Maybe that's a prediction, I guess.
Sure.
But Roland doesn't consider himself to be a sorcerer. He calls the Man in Black a sorcerer, but Roland does stuff like this, and he doesn't consider himself a sorcerer. So like that makes me sort of reminded how the elves of Middle Earth could basically make magic bread, but like only in the sense that if you spend 8,000 years making bread, then any bread you make might as well be magic bread, but it's not like there was a spell involved necessarily. So I think where I land on this is like many of his abilities, like this hypnosis and his marksmanship abilities, sort of blur the line between magic and preternatural skill.
Yeah, I like that, and I agree that that's kind of what I think King is trying to confuse you with here, and not necessarily confuse you with, but like hint towards that he is someone who is gunslingers, as you said, are like the knights of this world kind of, and they have great skill, but also some sort of power.
Yeah, I think he's maintaining this ambiguity on purpose because he doesn't tap into his mana here. It's not really a ritual beyond what you would do for a normal hypnosis where you just wave a thing around and then like Spark of Dark, where's my fire? It's like, okay, is that a spell or is it just a nursery rhyme? Roland doesn't really know, and that's actually kind of interesting. Yeah,
it's kind of like myth, right? In that, like, you could see a story of these mythological gunslingers that can reveal the truth of you just by flicking a bullet across their fingers or something like that. Like, it feels like a story that would be passed down.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Roland mercifully allows Jake to forget all about that stuff. He asks him first, and then Jake says to him, yeah, I want to forget it. I remember dying. Yeah. I tasted shit in my mouth. It was the worst thing ever. Please let me forget that. And he does. He does it. And then as the child sleeps, he wonders, not for the first time, that this is clearly all sort of some trick, but he doesn't care because, as you said, he likes the boy already. He is taken to him immediately. And I want to use this part to kind of talk to you about the Westernness of it all, because this is kind of falling into a pretty popular trope amongst the Western or samurai genre, which actually have a lot in common. There's the Lone Wolf and Cub is one of the most popular examples of this. I think Shane uses this a little bit too. And then, of course, most recently we have Disney Plus's The Mandalorian, which is the trope of the aged gunslinger, gruff guy, and the child. And that's exactly what King is exploring.
Yeah, right. The Mandalorian and the child are their names.
Yes.
I think he is exploring it here, but I think he's doing more than just straightforwardly implementing the trope. I think he's using it in a very specific way, as we'll see, and as we've kind of hinted at. Basically, he is humanizing our gruff gunslinger. That's for sure. I already said that's, I think, what the purpose of this chapter is almost. But then I think he's going to use this very same trope to dehumanize him, which is the novel twist, right? Which is the surprising direction.
I agree, because at the end of these stories, what is the end of these stories? It's that the gruff gunslinger, the Mandalorian, Shane, Lone Wolf will, be made more human by the interaction of the kid and learn and grow from that, and set their life aside to try to help the young person. And that does not seem to be where this story is going.
Yeah. Yep. I think you're right. I'm afraid you're right.
So after getting some water from a mechanical pump that runs on atomic power and was built by a company called North Central Positronics, maybe I'll just stop and let you react to that before I move on.
I mean, I love this kind of thing. I really do. I don't know why. It's just like he's throwing a nuclear-powered water pump and the word positronics into this cowboy story. And then you just see King just kind of looking at you going, what now? What now? And I just love the headspace it puts me in. So also Roland knows what a battery is and what an atomic slug is.
Yep.
So he's not unfamiliar with it. He's not like gaping at this thing like magic. He's familiar with it. So this is a thing in his world. And I think at this point, we kind of now have this like tripod of anachronism, or maybe 4 points as we find out more about Gilead later, because we have this Western world that they're in now, this desert and the town of Tull and all that. And then we have New York City in the 80s or whatever it is. It's the 80s, right?
Yeah, 70s or 80s. Late 70s, early 80s,
and then we have like fantasy feudalism with the Gilead flashback, although there's pistols in that, which, whatever. And now apparently we have sci-fi future tech that really can't possibly come from any of those settings. And it's just sitting here in the middle of this desert world.
Yeah.
And
Roland's surprised to see it, but not, like you said, not because he doesn't know what it is, just that he's surprised it's still here.
yeah, he's like not happy to find it here, but not altogether shocked. Yeah.
Yeah, and he doesn't like it.
Yeah.
That is something we have to point out. He does not like it being here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of like how it's almost as if these things, these anachronisms, are just kind of poking through into the world, right? Like there's not a demarcation line. It's just like, oh, here's just like, boom, I'm pushing into your Western world with Hey Jude, pushing into your way station with a nuclear powered water pump. They're just like kind of just like come out of the ground and into this world suddenly, at various random places. It almost seems.
Yeah, and I mean that, and one of the kind of subtle mysteries is like, okay, I want to know where it came from, obviously, but I also want to know, like, if you were to ask Roland, like, okay, Roland, you recognize that song as being a song called Hey Jude. Who do you think wrote that song? Where does it come from, right? Or like, okay, you know what an atomic slug is. What's an atomic slug, Roland? How does that work? Like, does he know, or does he just know what it's called? And it's like, I really want to know the answers to these questions. Or understand the context that will allow me to understand the answer. Excited about that. I mean, I love this kind of thing. I love books that put you in this headspace of just like wanting to find out more about the world.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly where I want you to be. So I'm glad you're asking these questions. I'm glad you want these answers, because I think that's a lot of what this book does. This book is a lot of question asking, and we start moving toward answers from here on. Of course, there'll be more questions too, but
cool.
It's exciting. So the gunslinger once again is sitting down and he starts ruminating on his past. He names like Cuthbert and Elaine, Jonas, and of course Susan. I like that King once again hits this beat, perhaps almost the most explicitly this time, that Roland is not a man who dwells on the past. I think that's a specific line in the section where it's like, Roland is not a man that was prone to dwell on his past. So the fact that his thoughts were going here surprised him. And it's hilarious, because it's like, that's all he's been doing. We're like on page 100 of this book, and that's all he's been doing the whole time.
Yeah. I mean, when the book just comes out and says it like that, I'm inclined to take the book's word for it.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm often suspicious and like, okay, are you tricking me? But I think in this case, rumination is unusual for Roland. So why has he been ruminating so much for the last 100 pages? What's different now? Did something happen just prior to the start of this story? I mean, we know he had that moment of vertigo. Did that mean? Sure. Did that mean something? I mean, because this has been happening pretty much ever since Tull. So yeah. Why is this happening? And it makes us ask that, and obviously Roland's asking that too.
Yep. All right. So the next day, Roland explains to Jake that he's after the man in black, and for the first time, we get told why. He needs to tell him where something is. A tower, a dark tower. When asked if the man in black is a bad man, which I think, like, as readers at this point, our answer is like, yup, we've seen that. Roland instead equivocates, right? He says, I guess that depends on where you're standing. And I think it's interesting for King to introduce ambiguity here after we saw a whole chapter with the terribly cruel things that the man in black has done. That he... poor Nort, and what he did, like
19.
Roland killed Tull, but the man in black like set the fuse. So I love that we're like the idea of Roland being not wanting to answer definitively here is super interesting to me.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this surprised me. His reaction surprised me, but I think it makes some sense, because Roland doesn't see himself as a good guy. We don't see any indication that he does think of himself that way. He carries a lot of guilt, but that doesn't really change his behavior or make him stop doing kind of awful things. I think his mission to catch this guy isn't about good and evil for him, not in his own mind anyway. Perhaps it's more of a personal vendetta or a personal sort of mission for some unrighteous reason. And, it forces us to consider that we don't actually know why Roland is after him specifically. He even says here, he doesn't know if he's going to kill him. He doesn't know if he's going to kill the man in black, which that's also surprising because I was like, oh, I thought he was just chasing him to kill him. Like that's literally what I assumed this whole time. He wants to kill him, and he's like, no, I might kill him, might not, but mainly I want to get an answer from him, or I want to make him take me someplace. Which I kind of just assumed he means the Dark Tower when he says that. I don't know why I assumed that, but
yeah, I think I think the book kind of makes you think that.
Yeah.
I think like, yeah, and after chasing someone for 12 years, wouldn't you know the answer to the question, are you going to kill him when you get there? Like, what's been spurring you on for this decade? So, yeah, I think that is really interesting.
Yeah, totally.
And I think it is starting to complicate. Like, what I love about it so much is you even said this last week, that the opening line of this book establishes good and bad. Roland, gunslinger, man in black, bad guy. And then as we've gone on, it's really started to complicate that a little bit. And I'm not here to defend the man in black. Certainly not. He's a bad dude. But it is taking this black and whiteness and introducing some gray. Well, some gray Roland here.
Definitely. I mean, the Man in Black's whole like MO, it seems, has been to just drag Roland through the mud and break him down. And I think maybe what we're seeing is that he's had 12 years to work on this project of bringing Roland down to his level. And maybe he's actually like what we're seeing is that he's kind of succeeded because I mean, like by the end of chapter 3, he's ready to do monstrous things that almost exactly put him on the same level as the Man in Black. He's basically willing to do the same thing the Man in Black did that was so awful to accomplish his goal. So
yeah, I agree. All right, so the next morning, they're preparing to leave the way station, but first they need some supplies. Jake says that there is a cellar, and Roland goes to investigate to see if there's food there. And as he's in there, the wall starts making a weird noise, and sand is pushed out through a hole in the wall, and something starts speaking to him with the voice of Alice, of Tull. And Alice, dead voice, like gives him kind of a prophecy, sort of. It says, go slow past the drawers, gunslinger. Watch for the Taheen. While you travel with the boy, the man in black travels with your soul in his pocket. And then it says no more. And this is like, there's some interesting stuff here, but this is really the text starting to lay on pretty thick what we've already talked about, that this is a trap. This is a trap. Jake was placed here to run into to run into Roland on purpose. And everyone seems to know it. Everyone. Yeah.
It's funny that as soon as the zombie thing says this, I got what it meant, but Roland doesn't. Like, he's like, what are you talking about? And it's like Roland is so detached from his humanity that it doesn't occur to him that the boy can be used against him in this way quite yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also interesting that he clearly treats this creature in a really antagonistic way, but like all it does is give him totally valid advice and warnings, and then it gives him the jawbone. Like,
yeah.
Seems it to isn't. I mean, be on his side, sort of.
Yeah, it's like, is it a demon? Is it just a dead person in there? Why is it speaking with Allie's voice? These aren't questions we get any of the answers to. We just see him like think back to an old proverb, take the dead from the dead, and this realization that only a corpse could reveal true prophecy. And so he thrusts his hand into the hole and yanks something out, and it's a jawbone. Because there's a dead guy in there. I think that this is the start of something that we're going to see multiple times throughout this section and through this book as a whole, with this idea of prophecy. And what's really interesting to me here is that Roland doesn't even question what this thing is saying as truth. Like, in fact, the realization that this must be a corpse because only the dead speak true like this is just taken as like a fact to Roland. Like, he doesn't question it at all. And I think that makes sense from the person we've seen. This is a person that obviously believes in prophecy, has been mentioned Ka several times. And so the idea of destiny is not a foreign one to him. So he's just like, yep, okay, yep, it's all true.
Yeah, later the text will have this moment where it highlights how he just kind of acts on instinct. I think this is kind of that. He's just like, oh, okay. And then he just like, he's like, I feel like the thing to do now is to reach into the hole. And he's like, oh, there's a jawbone. I guess I should keep this. And then it becomes it turns out to be useful later. And he's never surprised by any of this. So he kind of just has this way of operating within this magical world where he just kind of does what feels right, and it turns out to be right usually.
Sure. Yeah. And then we've got, I mean, there's not really much to say about these words yet, but there's just some stuff and some fun stuff King's throwing in here. Prophecy is just a really fun way of like setting up things, where you don't have to explain them at all, which is like watch for the Taheen. We know what those are, but we don't know what that means.
Yeah, like and then, watch in a good way or in a scared way. Yeah.
And go slow past the drawers.
Yeah.
Or the drawers. Drawers.
Yeah, good point. We don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it says something about how like dreamlike this story has been, that you can just kind of move on from this idea that corpses sometimes just talk to you from the walls of cellars.
Sure.
Roland just he acts like this is concerning and it's an issue, and he sends Jake away, but it's not necessarily surprising. It's not necessarily any more surprising than finding a nuclear powered pump. Whereas Jake reacts like a normal person, where he's terrified, but Roland just kind of knows what to do. This is part of his world.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I enjoy that. I mean, that's it. Like when you have Jake is kind of being used as the classic, let's introduce a character unfamiliar with this world to kind of teach us about it along with the character. And that's kind of how it's being employed here. And just not even explicitly, but just through the reactions and how the reactions contrast, we see that this is weird, but not that weird for this world.
Yeah, totally.
So they depart the way station, and for the first time, Roland thinks he sees the fire of the man in black, and then instead of exciting him, it starts to worry him, and he remembers these words from court, "Where the man who fakes a limp." So the book is really starting to push this idea that the man in black is wanting to be caught. He's wanting Roland to catch up.
Yeah, he's luring him in, and this is all part of his trap.
Yeah. And then after taking a rest one afternoon, when they're a few days into the desert, Roland starts telling Jake of his childhood, and we get this really interesting exchange. He's hypnotizing Jake again because Jake is refusing to sleep, and he's talking about the bad man, Martin, who is not the man in black, but kind of, maybe evil twins. If they ever were to, I think they must have been brothers, maybe even twins. But did I ever see them together? No, I never did. And he says, Martin is like Merlin. Do you know who Merlin is? Do you ken Merlin, where you come from? And Jake responds, yeah, Merlin and Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. And King writes, the gunslinger felt a nasty jolt going through him. And that is huge, right? Because it's not just like, oh, I'm surprised that you also know of this story. Like to Jake, it's just like a children's story, a myth. To Roland, it seems like something more. Yeah,
there's a lot here, right? We've got a reference to Merlin, to Arthur, to the knights. And Roland reacts so strongly to this, but we don't know why. It's almost like this has some immediate and like visceral meaning to him beyond just like being a legend. Also,
and he calls him Arthur Eld.
Yeah,
he has his own name for him.
Right. So like it's similar but different. Yeah. So he also considers whether the evil man that he knew as a child was actually the man in black, or perhaps a twin, or something. He doesn't know for sure though. And in any case, I think though it introduces the concept that Roland has been dealing with this general sort of thing since childhood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I mean, like we find out a little bit more specifics later, but there's this idea that like, okay, well, if this Martin guy was hanging around in the place where he grew up, then has he literally been sort of in the eye of the man in black his whole life? That's where my mind went anyway.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because like to me, it would just make sense to make this clear, right? Like to say, yeah, Martin is the man in black. I knew this person as a kid. He was a bad man. I knew him back then, and now I'm chasing him for some reason that's going to be revealed later. But King doesn't do that. He says he complicates it more. Mm-hmm. He doesn't think they're the same person, but they might be close to being the same people.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah. It's interesting and further mysterious. Makes me want to figure out what the heck's going on here.
Yeah. So the conversation lulls Jake to sleep, and then Roland is laying down, and don't you know it, he starts thinking about the past again. And we flash back to that past this time, and we go to an earlier time, and we know it's an earlier time because King almost immediately emphasizes the contrast. We see the sky is brilliantly white. There's the smell of rain on the air, and there is green as far as the eye can see. This is the most different scene and setting from the one we've seen so far we could possibly have. This is clearly before the world has moved on.
Yeah. Again, I find myself fixated on this idea that we have no idea how long ago this was. And maybe that's a meaningless question because time is soft,
Sure.
But yeah, it might as well be a different world, right? Like it does feel like more of a fantasy world, even though it seems to be the same world, except before it kind of had all the life sucked out of it. We don't know. We don't know what this process was or how or why, but
yeah, and it does seem interesting. Like if Roland was, let's say, 12 in this flashback and is in his 40s now or something, which is not something we actually know. So I'm not giving you any information. But if that's the case, it seems interesting that in that short amount of time, things would have changed as fundamentally as it does between these two settings.
I agree. That's kind of what I guess that's kind of what I was getting at and hadn't quite articulated is like he goes back later. He mentions like going back to the city of Gilead or whatever the name of the city is. And like the walls are falling down and like the impression you get is like incredible disrepair and weathering and like it's a ruin now. And you're like, but like within a few years, you wouldn't see that kind of deterioration. So clearly there's some kind of accelerated something happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Roland and his best friend, Cuthbert, along with Cuthbert's hawk named David, and yes, it is David from David and Goliath, it specifically mentions that, are being instructed in the way of the gun by Court. Bert is this kind of fast-talking jokester who lets his mouth get him in trouble, and Court is their instructor who's just absolutely ruthless. Like, he just beats the shit out of Cuthbert, and he also, like, tries to impart a lesson upon Roland as well, but, like, Roland doesn't seem to get it at all.
Yeah.
I love we're starting to really set up Roland as, like, he's kind of slow and kind of boring and kind of plain. I love that characterization.
Yeah, right. He's not smart. He's not moral.
Yeah.
He's kind of just like a very normal kid in some pejorative sense of that word, right? Like he's not the secret savior, which is a fun way of taking a story because normally these fantasy epics are about the kid who is the secret savior who's super special. Yeah, I mean, I guess he's a gunslinger, but
he is. Yeah. But I do think it's interesting that we kind of we don't know really how the caste or class system in this world works, but we do kind of see in this opening moment that Bert is treated by Court differently than Roland is. Like, he's much rougher to Cuthbert. He's not like respecting of Roland, but like, I don't know. I just got the feeling of this sense of seniority where Roland is above Cuthbert in some way.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it seems like Roland is basically the prince, right? I don't know if it says it right out like that, but
yeah, it does not, but
you can infer more or less, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because from all of Roland's like thinking about Court, I had this sort of image in my mind of like a fatherly wise teacher. But turns out the Court is just this unlikable, harsh, hard ass. Yeah, he's just like beating the shit out of this kid, and I don't know. I found it a little bit surprising that he was so unappealing when we finally do meet him.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if that's just like how time kind of softens those memories, and you remember the lesson and not the pain attached to it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But this entire flashback, Matt, is kind of like a parable on the death of innocence. And here we started with this happy sunny day with these two young boys training to be knights. And the biggest issue on their minds is how mean our instructor is going to be to us. And if he is going to take away our dinner, that this kind of just quaint and happy and innocent life that these people are living. And it is such a big contrast from every other moment of the book so far. Like everything up to this moment was dour and bleak, and Jake introduces some life into the story, but still, like, there's still hopelessness. There's still this idea that there's this trap happening. And then this scene almost feels like it's in a completely different story.
Yeah, this is a very clearly different Roland too. He's innocent, he's lighthearted, he has friends, he has like mundane concerns. They want to go like sneak some food from the cook, you know. Of course, that's all ruined pretty quickly.
Yeah, all this comes crashing down around both of our characters immediately.
It's like this is his last memory of peace.
Yep. And it is interesting that this is the first flashback he goes to. So this to Roland, to present day Roland, is a like watershed moment in his life. So Roland and Cuthbert head to the kitchen to get some food from their favorite adult. I love how they describe Hax as this like the best version of adults. He's not like Cord at all. He doesn't treat them like children. He treats them with respect, and he always feeds them extra food. And it's like you almost get an idea who this person is right away, right? Like there was always an adult that was just like nicer to you than all the ones lecturing you, and you just liked them a little bit better. That's Hax to them. And then while sitting under the stairs eating their pie, they happen to overhear Hax and the random guard mention a plot by the good man Farson, who wants them to ship poisoned meat to a town called Taunton. And almost instantly, childhood over. And I love how King writes this moment, because Roland looks back at Cuthbert and he looks into his eyes and sees a man who's already made up his mind, or rather a man who is at the fate of Ka. Like this idea that Ka put them in the stairwell to hear this treason, and Ka wills them to tell the treason and to damn Hax to death. And Roland looks into Cuthbert's eyes and sees gunslinger eyes. I love that moment. Like this childhood is over. You are a gunslinger now, and these are the choices of a gunslinger: to tell and to demand and to bring someone to their fate.
Yeah. I wanted to say bring someone to justice, but I'm not sure that that's what this is about actually.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it is, and we'll get to that in a bit. But
so all this recent talk of traps makes me wonder if this isn't also a trap. Like did Ka put them on this stairwell, or did someone else put them on this stairwell? Was this orchestrated to create this situation, to lodge this splinter of guilt into Roland, to give him this niggling little question to torture himself with for the rest of his life? Because, you know, he's still ruminating on this. This is his origin story in a sense, right? Like he basically, I mean, let's just map it out for a second, okay? He was told not to eat any food. He went to this guy to illicitly get him food, so he's already like breaking a code in a certain sense. And then he overhears the guy who kind of took pity on him conspiring, and then he turns the guy in and gets him killed. And like it doesn't escape me that like we don't know what the hell is happening. Like what is the socio-political situation here? Like why do they want to ship poisoned meat? Is there maybe some other interpretation of what they saw that would absolve this guy, because he's clearly not contrite about it? It's like I find it very unlikely that the situation is as simple as Child Roland thinks it is, I guess. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, most interestingly enough, the Farson, the enemy here, is called the good man. The good man. So how does that work? And I think we have to remember there's this kind of confusion between the Man in Black and Martin, who we learn Farson is another name of his. So Martin and Farson are the same person, but the Man in Black is kind of maybe one of those people. And we remember when Roland was asked, is this a bad man? And he says, well, that depends. And here we see that this person who may or may not be associated with him is called the good man. And so, yeah, that's really interesting, right? I think this is kind of introducing the complexity of life to this child. Yeah, definitely. And the story doesn't answer these questions for us, I don't think. I wonder if it ever will. But yeah, it's a cool storytelling moment for sure. Some of these questions I can answer with, I don't remember, because I sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. It's been a few years since I've read the story to completion. So, that's an underrated superpower for that particular role, just being like, yeah, you might be right, because I don't remember. Awesome. So we meet Stephen Deshane, Roland's father, after he just told his dad what he saw and condemned Hax to death. And Roland, his father says it preys on you, right? And Roland says, yes, it preys on me like a hawk preys. And Stephen has a really interesting say about that general concept. Like, if it preys on you, yet you told why. And Roland starts with, how could I not? Treason was, and his father waves that away. If you did it for something as cheap as a schoolbook idea, you did it unworthily. I would rather see all of Taunton poisoned. So that's what you were talking about, right? This idea of it's justice. What is going to happen to Hax is justice. And Stephen, Roland's father, his mentor, his paternal like figure, literally and figuratively, says, nah, not that. And then Roland follows it up with, I didn't do it for that. I wanted to kill him, both of them. Liars, black liars, snakes. They hurt me. They changed something, and it hurt. I wanted to kill them for it. I wanted to kill them right there. So this idea of revenge, like, it's almost like the text is literally saying that they've taken Roland's childhood from him. Witnessing their betrayal stole Roland's childhood from him, and he wants revenge. And his father's like, yeah, okay. Mm-hmm. That's crude, Roland, but not unworthy.
Yeah.
Not moral either. But it's not your place to be moral, which is like, I think Gunslinger, we've been calling them these knights, right? And knights, like this concept, this code of chivalry, this code of morality. And doesn't seem like it. Right.
I mean, it's almost more of like and maybe I'm reaching, but more of like an honor culture than, because they're not even pretending to be about real justice.
Right.
They're about writing like slights. Mm-hmm. Which is what this is here. Like Roland is saying, like, I feel personally insulted by this guy, and so I had to kind of rectify that. And his father is like, yeah, that's fine. And it's sort of orthogonal to whether it's moral or not. It's not a concern of his. I love this idea that he's like, morals may be always beyond you, which. What a fantastic thing to say about this protagonist, who obviously does kind of struggle or not even bother to struggle in some cases with the idea of morality.
Yeah. You were not quick like Cuthbert or Van A's boy. And I don't think he's talking quick as in like reflexes, right? I think he's talking intelligence.
Yeah.
That's all right, though. It will make you formidable. Like your power will be your lack of morals.
Yeah.
This is dad saying this to him.
It's great. I mean, you expect him to be like, of course you did the right thing, son. And instead he's like, it's good that you had a personal vindictive reason for killing this man instead of a high-minded one, because that would be, foolish.
Right. And it's so easy to build a case for the high-minded reason, right? Mm-hmm. Like, these people were conspiring to poison a town. Like, they talk about, yes, children will be killed too. That's part of it.
Yeah.
Like, they'll get sick and they'll pass out and they'll die. But that apparently is immaterial or at least not the right reason to do this.
Yeah. Before we move on, don't think it escaped me that his father's name is Stephen and he's a king.
Okay. See, sometimes I like just letting you pull stuff out like that.
Well, I don't know what it means other than,
sure.
He's his father. He's Roland's father. He's the father. He's the creator of the character. So I guess I do kind of know what it means.
Yeah, I mean, I think you do.
Okay, all right.
But maybe you don't.
Maybe I
don't know. So after this, one of the things Roland says to his father is he wants to see it. He wants to be there to see the execution, the hanging. So Roland and Cuthbert go to Gallows Hill to watch the execution of Hax. They get there like super, super early, and it's almost like this symbolic rite of passage of growing up, right? They condemned this man to death. They want to see it happen. And I love when they get there, they want to like go up on the gallows stand itself and they chicken out. They can't do it, which like I love is this like they're thrusting themselves into adulthood, but like not quite yet.
Yeah, it's a great like believable moment of like, oh yeah, these are still kids.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is a good time to like mention that the bird imagery has been around a lot in the story, right? We have Zoltan, we have David, the hawk, and then we have all these crows like surrounding the gallows. And this thing they're gonna do, they brought bread and they're gonna place the bread under the feet of Hax after he's been hung. To kind of bring, because they leave the corpses there to be devoured, and so they're going to lay bread at his feet as some kind of symbol. So there's a lot of bird imagery going on here.
Yeah, and most of these are either carrion birds or flesh-eating birds of some stripe.
Yeah. And didn't the one Tahine we have seen also have a bird head?
Yeah, I think it had a bird head. I think it might have even specifically had a raven head. I don't remember exactly. Yeah. So like I'm thinking about birds that eat flesh. Maybe this is some kind of symbol for this world being dead, and like the Tahine are like bird people who are maybe scavengers. Just the idea of scavenging and eating meat, eating flesh, eating eating the body, and we've also had this imagery of like blood sacrifice, and so I know I'm like mashing together a bunch of ideas and symbols, but they all seem to be of the same sort of variety to me. So
yeah, just something to think about as we go forward.
Okay.
So Roland removes a splinter from the wood of the gallows itself and pockets it, and he doesn't even have a good reason for why he does this to Cuthbert. He's just like, just to have something to remember this from. And I want to talk about that for a bit, because I don't know if you did this on purpose while you were writing your notes, but you kind of mentioned that this whole scene was nagging him like a splinter, and it's almost as if that is what this is. This is a splinter, a piece of this thing that he takes with him because it's become a part of him. It's really hard to get out.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm not sure if I'm misremembering or not, but does Roland still carry this piece of wood in his bag?
I don't know if we've seen that definitively.
Okay, because otherwise I don't know why I would think that, but I may just have made that up completely. But anyway, in any case, it is this symbol for this guilt that he carries, right? It's literally a piece of the thing that he used to kill the first person who wronged him. And I'm also reminded of the concept of like having a piece of the true cross as being like a religious fetish, which is again like a crucifix is a thing that you use to kill a condemned person, and then you're taking a piece of it and using that as a kind of reminder. So I think we're seeing something important about Roland in identifying that humble man doing his job had more honor and worth than like the spectacle of justice that was enacted here.
Yeah.
Because he's as he's waiting for the execution, he's thinking about Hax, and like Hax just kind of bustling about the kitchen doing his work has more honor than all of this that's happening here. And I think if anything, it's like his kind of childish and maybe naive concept of what honor and justice means clashing with the reality of what honor and justice mean in the world that he lives in.
Yeah, because like one of the things that it mentions, like as people are getting there, they're like bringing food with them. Like this is a party.
Yeah.
And it's so upsetting to him. And I think that's one of the whole loss of innocence, like the growing up thing, that you realize these things that you've kind of built up as these grand, important things, like the justice being handed to a man who deserves it, is just kind of a joke. And like these people just see it as entertainment. And he's so uncomfortable with the entire concept of it. Like I love when during the execution itself, like Hax like makes no concession, like he says, "I have not forgotten the face of my father," which is a very important saying we've seen in this world. Like it's a high speech saying. We kind of saw that earlier with where Cuthbert was saying it very like demurely to court as he was apologizing for making mistakes. And so it seems to have some real weight and importance. And even at the end here, Hax holds himself up as a person who has done no wrong. And how uncomfortable he is with squaring these things. Yeah,
and they just ignore the fact that he maintains his innocence, right? It doesn't matter at all. Yeah. And clearly it bothers Roland that he does maintain his innocence because Roland knows him to be guilty, right?
Right? Yeah.
So, yeah.
So the two witness that execution, and then it is to them like disappointingly uneventful. Like it just kind of happens. And then they lay the bread at the feet of Hax to be consumed by the birds along with this traitor, and then leave. Yeah.
The idea of them having caused this death and now they're basically summoning the birds to come eat his body is so visceral and kingish.
Yeah. I love it. And to really sell the death of innocence here, Roland wraps up this story saying, "The land did not fall to the good man for another 5 years. And by that time, Roland was a gunslinger. His father was dead. He himself had become a matricide, and the world had moved on. The long years and long rides had begun."
Feel like we're skipping over some details there, Roland, buddy.
You know what I find really interesting here is the way he himself had become a matricide. It's just an interesting way to phrase that fact that he just kind of throws at us.
Yeah, right. I mean, and it's one of those things where when you're telling a story like this, it immediately just invites a question of like, okay, how'd that happen? It's probably not going to be what we're expecting. It's probably going to be like a surprising twist on, okay, he feels responsible for killing his mother. Did he actually do it on purpose? Was it an accident? Was he forced to? There's all kinds of ways that could have played out, right? Like we know he loves his mother. He keeps thinking about the nursery rhymes, specifically her singing the nursery rhymes and her, her red lips and her voice singing. So like whatever happened, whatever went down with his mother is clearly this terrible trauma for him because it kind of literally echoes through his head all the time. But 5 years. And then the world had moved on. So basically, from this point into the next 5 years, you get the impression a huge amount has happened and a huge amount has changed in this world.
Yep. I didn't pull it out, but we have to mention that Roland himself brings up Oedipus. He's like talking about how after he meets with his father, he's like, I think he's going to go have sex with mom now.
Yeah.
And he didn't really understand what that means, but he knows it's something that he likes to do. And then he says later Susan will tell him the story of Oedipus, and it allows him to explain why he felt gross and weird about this whole thing. And so like here at the end of this thing where we said his father is dead, he has committed matricide, I'm kind of like, is that connecting to any Oedipal stuff going on there?
Right. Yeah. Is there? Yeah. I don't have anything to add there, but I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. So the chapter closes with Roland and Jake finally making it out of the desert into the hills, the foothills at the base of the mountain, and they spot for the first time the man in black high up on the cliffs. And it's this exciting moment of this thing that he's been chasing the entire time. He sees him for the first time.
Yeah, it's very cool, but also foreboding to see the man in black in the distance. Like you mentioned earlier, now that he's close at hand, it's not an exciting thought for Roland.
Yeah. And Roland, as he watches Jake sleep, he thinks about the past story we just heard about. He thinks of Hack's death and of the bread. He thinks about how all his quests, everything he does, always seems to end on the killing field. And so too shall this maybe. In the end of this chapter, Roland refers to Jake as the sacrifice. And already is seeming to say like the only way out of this is the quest for the tower. Like Ka will reveal itself on my quest for the tower, and this might be the only place to an end that does not end like this. But we have a sacrifice here, Matt. So we've in this chapter we've met Jake, we've fallen in love with Jake, and now here at the end of the chapter we're labeling Jake as a thing to be sacrificed.
Yeah, he's stealing himself for having to kill Jake. And I think we're going to get to that next.
Yep, we will, because we are moving on to Chapter 3, The Oracle and the Mountains. And we open this chapter with another classic kingism that we talked about before. The first words of the chapter are, the boy found the oracle, and it almost destroyed him. And this is a attention-grabbing start to the chapter for sure, but then we kind of back up and for a few pages talk about their journey out of the desert and into the foothills and talk about the events that led to this oracle attack.
Yeah, again, King is doing this thing where we jump back in time to fill in details, and there's this idea that, like, in order to tell this story, first, you have to tell that story.
Right. And what I love about the opening is how much attention it pays to like the joy of them getting out of the desert. Like there's this moment where Roland and King describes Jake as an animal, like a deer that is so excited by all the sounds and the smells and the life that exists in the foothills. It's almost animalistic. Like it's in the wilderness in his eyes, which were white and starry, the eyes of a horse scenting water and held back from bolting only by the tenuous chain of its master's mind, like a horse at the point where only understanding, not the spur, could hold it steady. It's just beautiful, like prose.
Yeah,
I love it.
Gorgeous language and also gorgeous concepts. I think that's the idea that the spur can't hold the animal steady, but only its understanding that it should restrain itself. I think that's great.
But I mean, I like this also because we see Roland kind of taking the role of caretaker in this language he's built up. Jake is an animal under his charge. And there's also this moment where Roland sees like a praying mantis sitting on top of Jake's sleeping head, and it just causes him to burst out laughing. The gunslinger snorted laughter, the first in God's knew how long. It's this really happy moment with like the beginning. Jake's excited, and then the gunslinger is smiling and laughing for the first time, and it's all colored by the first moments of this chapter where we said the oracle is going to almost kill Jake, and then the last moments of last chapter where he called Jake a sacrifice. Like, so we're asking ourselves, is the oracle part of this sacrifice? Is that who Roland is going to sacrifice Jake to? And I really think the contrast works here.
Yeah, you're simultaneously enjoying this period of actual happiness for these long suffering characters, but you're also filled with dread because you know that we're going somewhere bad. It's an uncomfortable place.
Yeah. Roland goes to sleep and dreams of Susan again. Susan burning to death tied to the Charyu tree. As she burns, she cries out to him about the boy, Jake, who then Roland sees in the dream up in the window where he normally would have seen Susan in his memories, and Jake's eyes are like marbled over, and there's a spike driven through the center of his head. Roland, having inadvertently placed his hands in the embers of the campfire, gets burned and wakes up and immediately knows Jake is in trouble. This kind of ties into the concept of prophecy and Ka and destiny and what have you, where Roland has almost this sixth sense about Jake.
Yeah. We saw a dead zombie thing claw its way out of the earth mainly to give him Jake-centric prophecies. So it kind of seems like the magic system or Ka or whatever it is thinks that this relationship between these two is important and is trying to reinforce it or protect it or something.
Yeah, that's fair. And I like how there's definitely some magic stuff going on, but King also builds in just like, he put his hand in the fire and it woke him up. And like the fire in his dream tied to the fire of his hand getting too hot and burning.
I
just like how there's always like an underlying thing underneath this magic system or whatever it is.
We keep having this idea of characters with like either a scar or a wound on their face or their head. And I'm kind of want to connect that to this to Jake having a spike driven through his head, but I'm not sure what it means.
I tried to look up if there's some like specific like religious imagery about a spike through the head, and I couldn't find anything like I super wanted to latch onto and pull it out here. I mean, it is death, right? It is like right into the brain. It's
a particularly specific and graphic kind of death, though. So
yeah.
I don't know. There was something made of this idea that like a scar on a particular part of the head was important. I might have to go reread to remind myself of what it was exactly.
Well, it's Alley of Tull had a scar right in the same spot where the spike is.
Okay. That's kind of what I thought, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So Jake is found in the middle of this black ring of stones with an altar standing at the center. On this altar is a demon, a succubus, and the chapter's titular oracle. And Roland, as you talked about earlier, acts without thinking, pulls out the jawbone, holds it in front of the demon, and it makes the effect of the succubus go away. This like sexual pleasure immediately go away, and he manages to pull Jake out of there.
Yeah. It tells us a lot about the magic system or whatever that we're operating in, because it's pretty loosey-goosey, right? He doesn't use the spell of this enchantment. He just kind of feels like a jawbone and a hand sign ought to do the trick, and then it works. And like, that's the thing about him. Like, he just has a feel for how this world works, and it's accurate, and it works for him.
Yeah, and it's not even that, like, the jawbone itself is, like, he's not thrusting the jawbone at the succubus, right? He's putting it in front of his vision and focusing on it, and that is what dampens the effect.
Right.
So, we're definitely not in a Brandon Sanderson novel here, where the magic system is going to have this clear defined set of rules. That's not really the way this book works.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've definitely got that at this point. I think, just commenting on the idea that not only is it fairly loose, but also this character just kind of does things and they work. Whereas I think what I mean specifically is like, I don't think that's true for just anybody. I don't think just anybody is necessarily going to have the intuition that, oh, I need to use this dead jawbone that I'm carrying around for some reason. I think he knows things for some reason.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So as we leave the desert behind, we're kind of leaving the Western genre behind a bit too, aren't we? We've moved, you've talked about this already, but we moved kind of into this more fantasy setting where suddenly we're using demon artifacts against the power of demons and it's working. And we've moved into another kind of genre, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think so.
And of course, Roland saves Jake. And we're given this, I love how the book is really laying this on thick, this image of innocence and purity. The moonlight on Jake's face reminded him again of a church saint, alabaster purity all unknown. He hugged the kid and put a dry kiss on his cheek, knowing that he loved him. Well, maybe that wasn't quite right. Maybe the truth was that he'd loved the kid from the first moments he's seen him, as he had Susan Delgado, and was only now allowing himself to recognize the fact, for it was a fact. And it seemed that he could almost feel the laughter from the man in black someplace far above them. And so like, I love how King lays this on though, because it's amazing to me on this close reread how many times we're hitting this beat of Roland loves this kid. He loves this kid. He loves this kid. And yet he knows he's going to have to sacrifice him and he keeps carrying on anyway.
Yeah. That's the dehumanizing part, right? That's where we're going in this chapter, that he continues to be faced with the monstrosity of this choice that he's heading toward, but he at no point does he really seriously consider not doing it. Yeah.
And we'll see that textually here when he meets with the Oracle, because the Oracle gives him the solution to his problem.
Yeah.
So yeah, speaking of that, he knows that the succubus there is an oracle, or at least he believes it is, and he has questions that he needs answering. But before he heads out there, he pops a pill. It's mescaline, Matt. It's peyote. And we hear a little bit of court. Like the story court used to tell us was that the old gods pissed over the desert and made mescaline. I love this so much.
Once again, I love how this book just pulls in elements from all over the place and just makes it work. Here's our cowboy knight. Has a pill of peyote that he just carries just in case he needs to engage in a spiritual battle with the succubus. Sure. Yeah, of course. It puts into context how relatively blasé the people of Tull were about the idea of like the undead and demons, because sometimes there's demons. Make sure you got your peyote with you.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah. I mean, we don't understand why he has it. I think you're right that like, this is a useful tool when dealing with some otherworldly shit. So just have it around.
Yeah.
So after taking it, the Mesk is kicking in, and Roland goes to confront the succubus. And for the second time in our story, sex is traded for information, as Roland, calmed and kind of dulled by the drug, is able to overpower the demon and get his prophecy. And there's a lot in this prophecy, Matt. A lot of it is just like stuff that I don't have a lot to say about, because it's just like, you're going to learn about this later, but it's interesting. I think it's worth covering, at least, because the succubus says 3, that is the number of your fate. 3 stands at the heart of your quest. Another number comes later. Now the number is 3. And then we go through the 3. The first is young, dark-haired. He stands on the brink of robbery and murder. A demon has infested him. The name of the demon is heroin. The second comes on wheels. I see no more. The third is death, but not for you. So we get this 3 is defined, and we get a little bit of information on the 3, but we don't know what to do. Any guesses at all what any of this means?
I mean, sort of, but also no. So immediately this makes me think that Roland is going to be going to New York and encounter some heroin addict doing an armed robbery, and he's going to have to enlist whoever this person is into his D&D party. Maybe a woman in a wheelchair she comes on wheels. I don't know, that image popped into my mind.
Sure.
The stuff about doorways and roses seems like stuff that will just make us nervous when we see roses and doorways, but doesn't really give us any information to make predictions with at this point. Like the idea of the third being death, you're like, okay, well, does that mean like death, the personified death, or does that mean death, the concept? Because it's weird that it's a sequence of 3 things. The first 2 are people. The third is death.
Yeah, but not for
not
you.
for
It
you.
It is not your death, Roland.
Yeah.
It is the death of something.
Someone, or
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, this is the kind of prophecy where it might make sense when it's like right on the verge of happening anyway. So it's not very helpful prophecy, actually.
Sure. And it's the kind of thing, like, you know, this strikes me as very fantasy genre-esque, right? Like, I think fantasy stories love to put prophecies like this in here, and it's just a way to set up. And also, like, whenever I hear prophecy now, I think of A Song of Ice and Fire and the House of the Undying and the prophecies that Daenerys gets there, and how much people have, like, dove into these things to use to kind of like predict and figure out the story. And I think this is a much lighter kind of prophecy. There's just not a lot to work with here, but I think it strikes me as exploring the tropes of the fantasy genre. I mean, we're talking about destiny and Ka and like fate and all these concepts, and prophecy just slots right into there with them.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, prophecy is a thing where, like, I feel like I've seen it done wrong many times in fantasy, where it's almost used as a trope where it's like the author doesn't really know why they're using it, other than you're supposed to use prophecies in fantasy, or like it's a way. Let me rephrase. They know why they're using it, but they're using it for a reason that I often find annoying, where they're like, well, I want to have this chosen one be the chosen one, so I'm going to have a prophecy where they're the chosen one. And it's like, yeah, that's a kind of like backwards storytelling that I don't particularly like. I've seen it done a bunch of times, and then I've seen a bunch of stories that do much more interesting things with prophecy, like you said. I mean, Song of Ice and Fire has these things where the prophecies can be creatively interpreted to refer to like 8 different characters, and that's actually kind of fun, because you're like,
Yeah.
it's almost deconstructing the notion of prophecy. I mean, I think in Worm there's prophecies where it's like, if there's a 99% chance of something happening, then what are you justified in doing to prevent it, and stuff like that, where it is basically a prophecy, but it's just attacked from a different angle. So I like that we're bringing prophecy in here, because I'm excited to see where he goes with it and how he uses it as a storytelling tool.
Well, and how Ka and the idea of foretelling almost seem to contradict each other in some ways, because like in this prophecy, Roland learns that he will indeed encounter the Man in Black, and they will speak of the tower. And then he asks, is there any way to save the boy, to spare the sacrifice, to spare Jake? And the Oracle's answer is, yeah, just turn around, go leave, cease, Gunslinger, strike your camp and turn back northwest. In the northwest, there is still a need for men who live by the bullet. And Roland says, I am sworn by my father's guns and by the treachery of Martin. Martin is no more. The Man in Black has eaten his soul. This you know. I am sworn. Then you are damned. So it's like, it's interesting, because like there's this idea of Ka, of the everything has been written and we must follow it. And Roland uses this to kind of justify his actions a lot, but he's being told by an oracle that he does have a choice, and he can leave. And she's even calling him out on his bullshit. Like, I am sworn by my father's guns and by the treachery of Martin. And the Oracle's like, dude, Martin's gone.
Yeah.
He doesn't exist anymore. Like, the Man in Black has devoured him. He's not there anymore. You know that. And yet I am still sworn by this. And it's like, well, then sorry, dude. Sorry.
Yeah. You know, this Oracle demon is remarkably benevolent, right? I mean, she did try to eat the kid, I guess, but like part of that you can view as like, well, this is kind of her nature as a creature, but like she gives him good advice, right? She's sort of looking out for his soul here, in a way where like I wouldn't expect sort of the normal like Christian mythologic concept of a demon to ever kind of just frankly be like, you should turn around because you're gonna be damned if you keep going down this path. And it's just interesting because it's like it calls into question the notion of like what is a demon exactly? Like it's some kind of supernatural entity, but demon has a very specific connotation that I'm not even sure this thing deserves.
Does that make you doubt the prophecies then? Like, then maybe it's not being entirely honest about all this, or not?
I didn't get the feeling that I was supposed to be doubting the prophecies. I'd have to reread it to really to really get a sense of that. Because
yeah, and I'm not saying you should. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, we did introduce the idea that like there's true prophecy and there's false prophecy, and only true prophecy comes from a corpse, and this is not a corpse, so therefore false prophecy could come from this thing. But then that begs the question of like, why does he even bother talking to it if he knows that it can lie to him? So yeah, I don't quite know what to do with that. I was assuming that this was not a lie.
Sure. And I mean, I think like to the whole demon thing, I do think there's this understanding in a lot of storytelling that like bargains with these dark powers, like they're not going to lie to you if you strike a bargain with them.
Yeah.
Now maybe like he basically agrees like, you give me your prophecy and I will let you have your way with me. And and she's a succubus, and that's exactly what she wants. And maybe there's an assumption that she assumes that she'll just trap him forever, and so it won't matter. But of course, Roland manages to defeat that. But I never doubted the prophecy the first time I read it, just because I it felt like this bargain struck type thing where the side is going to uphold its side of the bargain, but like maybe in like a tricksy demon-y way where it doesn't lie at all, but also like just like, oh yeah, but now you're stuck here forever. Ha ha ha, I got you. Type of way.
Yeah, none of that occurred to me. But it is. I view it as one of the many mysteries of the book. Like, okay, what are these demons actually? Because demon is like a fake word that kind of causes you to just like overlook the concept. Like we know the Man in Black is a sorcerer. It's like, okay, well, what does that mean? Like, he's not a sorcerer in the manner of any other sorcerer from any other book that we've seen. These are not demons in the same sense that we're used to. In like the Christian sense, these are creatures. There's some kind of creature. What made them? Where did they come from? Why are they here? And I actually want to know that now.
Yeah. But I kind of want to go back to what you said is like, why would he put himself in this position? Like, why does he need these answers so much?
Yeah.
And I think that is just, it seems to be like a core part of Roland. Like he both trusts destiny, trusts Ka to direct him. If God wills it, there will be water. And also like needs to know. He just has this inherent need to know that he's willing to put himself at risk. He's willing to be ravaged sexually by this demon to get answers to questions. And I think it's a real defining moment for him, because they could have just kind of skirted around the circle. It's obvious that the demon is trapped in this black ring, and they could have just go around it and then they're safe, or just use the bone and they're safe. But he chooses to put himself in this position because he needs answers. He wants information. He wants to know.
Yeah. I love this kind of nascent idea that Roland doesn't think in terms of good and evil, or even really in right and wrong in the sense that we use them, but maybe in more like things that comport with Ka and things that are against Ka. I don't know. I'm trying to fit like a framing onto his actions, and that's kind of closest I can get right now, because the story has really not told us what Ka is still. It keeps giving us these fingers pointing at what Ka is, but never quite telling us what it is. Yeah. And so when he says stuff like, I have to do this, Ka wills it, and the demon's like, you don't. You're not sure, like, does he just, is this a religious belief, or is this a real compulsion, or what exactly? Yeah. And yeah, like you mentioned, he totally does seem very much motivated by a need for answers. Again, here we learned that he doesn't want to kill the Man in Black. He wants to ask him a question, and this scene shows how far he's willing to go to get answers.
Yeah. And so the demon has her way with him. It's pretty graphic, but not near as graphic as anything in the first chapter. But he, maybe through the power of mescaline, manages to say, "Okay, I'm done." And he walks up, pushes the demon off, walks up, and leaves. Yeah. And she's very unhappy about it. She's not happy.
Yeah. I mean, it's downright restrained compared to some things, right? Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. So I mean, that's like we talked about how King does weird sex stuff a lot. I mean, this is his character's fucking a sex demon, so definitely still weird sex stuff, but it's not always as disturbing as it was in that first chapter. Yeah,
it's more fuel on the fire of like, okay, why is there all this sex magic in this world? Like I get that it's kind of King's proclivity to kind of explore the waters of sexuality and like the kind of the parts of our lives we don't want to talk about or look at. But within this story, like within this world, why is this way? Is there a reason? Is there or not even like a plot reason? I don't mean like, what force caused this to happen. I also mean like on a crafting this as a story reason. Why did he choose to have all of the magic and the demons be all sexually related?
Yeah. I think that's a fair question.
Curious.
Yeah. All right, so I really love this moment. He returns to Jake, and Jake was so terrified and is so happy to see him. And then Roland just was really exhausted, and he asked Jake to make a fire. And then there's this moment where we hear Jake say, "Spark a dark, where's my sire? Will I lay me? Will I stay me? Bless this camp with fire." And Roland is very distraught at hearing this. He says, "Picked it up from me." The gunslinger thought, not in the least surprised to discover he was all over goosebumps and on the verge of shivering like a wet dog. "Picked it up from me, words I don't even remember saying. And will I betray such? Ah, Roland, will thee betray such true thread as this in a sad, unthreaded world? Could anything justify it?" And I mean, I love this because this is like the second beat of the story so far where Jake seems to be like starting to talk like Roland, like Roland is rubbing off on him and he's becoming more like him. Like there's this moment earlier where he's talking to him and Jake responds in Yar, which is something that Roland has said multiple times throughout these chapters. He's mimicking the gunslinger speech. And this is King kind of turning the knife, right? Because like Roland clearly doesn't want to do this.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of feels inevitable, but King is also feeding us these morsels of hope that it might not be inevitable, because otherwise why ask himself these questions?
Yeah, well, and that's the interesting thing of the stakes, right? Is that we've built this up as a thing that's going to happen. There's going to come a time where Roland is going to be given the direct choice of sacrificing Jake towards his quest. And we're putting everything towards the fact that it's inevitable he's going to do it. But we still allow that niggling doubt to like exist in the reader and in Roland himself. And I think that allows you to kind of really be invested in this. Like there's always a possibility that he will change his mind. There's always a possibility that he will back off of this thing and not be willing to make that sacrifice.
Yeah.
And so you don't know. You know the choice is coming. You know the way the choice seems to going to be land, but you don't know for sure if that's the way things are going to go.
Yeah, that's the drama of this chapter, is this inner conflict within him, and the reason the chapter works so well is that King keeps it balanced in a way where you kind of feel that it's going to go one way, but you really don't want it to, and you can believe that maybe Roland will have a crisis of conscience and change his mind. You really want him to, but I think that's just good character work and good storytelling.
Mm-hmm. So the next morning, they begin their ascent of the cliff face, and while they do so, they chat about many things. For the first time since he's gotten here, Jake wonders aloud why he is in this world. How did he get here? And he asks Roland, and the gunslinger seems to already have an answer. Because the man in black has drawn you here, and because of the tower. The tower stands as kind of a power nexus in time. I don't understand that. Nor do I, the gunslinger said. But something has been happening, just in my own time. The world has moved on, we say. We've always said, but it's moving on faster now. Something has happened to time. It's softening. Matt, what's the tower? What is it?
It's a power nexus in time.
Oh, okay. Cool.
So what is time in this story? Because earlier in the poem they say time is flat and life sustain. Is that the saying? Or am I mixing things together with 100 Years of Solitude? But anyway, we have ideas, settings, tropes from the past, the present, the future. We have at least one dude who seems to be capable of traveling between these worlds or settings or times. I mean, is it possible that the man in black doesn't so much travel from this world to New York as he simply travels to the future? Are all these worlds points along a single timeline? I mean, introducing the idea of time itself being messed up, and then the fact that we have sort of different worlds that can be placed along a timeline definitely ask certain questions, I think.
Yeah. The line is time's a sheet.
Time's a sheet.
And life sustain.
Not time's a flat circle. Okay.
Time's a sheet and life's a stain. A stain on that sheet.
Time. Yeah. A stain maybe spreading through that sheet. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's great. And I love that, like, what does that mean? And Roland's like, I don't know. Yeah. But I'm trying to figure it out too. That's my whole thing. I'm trying to figure it out. And I like, the world has moved on, we say, we've always said, which is like, again, like this confusion of time, right? Like Roland was maybe 16 by the time the world had begun to move on. Like, so what do you mean we've always said that? What do you mean by that?
Who's we?
What?
Yeah. Right. I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
Full of questions.
We also learn that Roland is from a place called New Canaan, which is another biblical reference, like the land God promised to Abraham. So we combine that with Gilead, the name of Roland's town or city or whatever, and we're really hitting this biblical thing pretty hard. Yeah,
and this interacts with this idea of time in a really interesting way, because it's like this one guy sped from like the ancient world, like the biblical world, to the Old West within his lifetime, and then throughout all of that, there's all these weird anachronisms that make it not quite work. Like they had handguns in biblical times somehow. So maybe that's kind of what we're seeing when he means time is softening. I don't know.
Yeah. All right, so then we kind of advance forward. A week later, Roland and Jake are at the top of the cliff. They are close now. They can smell the man in black. And as they get close, Jake is suddenly terrified, as if he knows. And he turns to Roland and begs him to let them turn back. But Roland says no. And we get this sentence here. The boy's face took on a wonder. You're going to kill me. He killed me the first time. And you're going to kill me this time. And I think you know it. Then the gunslinger responds, and I love this, felt the lie on his lips, then spoke it. You'll be all right. And a greater lie yet. I'll take care. And
oof.
Man, it's so hard to read. Like it's so amazing to me. And I think this is a testament to just King's character work, that like, this isn't a long book. And this is only, these two chapters are only a third of this not very long book. And yet, I've totally fallen in love with Jake, and I've totally fallen in love with Jake and Roland's interaction. And this moment is heartbreaking.
Yeah. Like even no matter what happens past this point, it's heartbreaking. It's like this trust has been broken. And the tragedy of it lands completely. The kid's reaction and everything is, I think this is basically the moment where the kid loses innocence, right? Yep. It's almost like the gunslinger, or the man in black rather, has not just set this trap to destroy Roland, but also maybe to damage or destroy this kid also at the same time. Yeah,
as like a imparting lessons of life to him.
Yeah,
as like the people in your life are going to betray you.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just going to happen.
This guy who you thought of as your caretaker, he's just like all the others, basically.
Yeah, like the professionals, right? Like that we get this beautiful characterization of Jake as he's surrounded by these professionals that he all hates. And finally he finds this gunslinger who seems like maybe for the first time a real father. And maybe he's just like the professionals. It's just his profession's a little bit different.
He's a professional gunslinger.
Yeah. So at the top of the mountain and at the mouth of a cave, they meet the man in black for the first time. He promises palaver on the other side and makes it clear that he will only expect it to be the two of them.
Yeah.
King is laying it on so thick at this point. I think he looks at Jake as he says that.
Yeah.
And in this moment, Roland looks at Jake and sees the image of Allie with the scar superimposed over his face, the previous sacrifice being laid atop the new one. It's this perfect imagery. I love it so much.
Yeah. No, that's what I was remembering. Yeah. It's just painful. Yeah.
Yeah. And Roland says, "Come with me or stay." The boy responded with the hard and humorless grin, his father's grin had he but known it. "And I'll be fine if I stay," he said. "Fine all by myself here in the mountains. Someone will come and save me. They'll have cake and sandwiches. Coffee in a thermos too. Do you say so?" "Come with me or stay," the gunslinger repeated, and felt something happen in his mind. An uncoupling. That was the moment at which the small figure before him ceased to be Jake and became only the boy, an impersonality to be moved and used.
Yeah, this is a great couple of paragraphs, right? Like,
it's so good.
The detail of like it being his father's professional soulless grin that comes across his face is so gutting. And also then do you say so is another Rolandism that he's channeling, which just reminds you that they're now connected in this way. And then I think this uncoupling is like exactly what the Man in Black wanted, because Roland dehumanizes the boy who he loves so he can use him as a tool. And this is just obviously like bally evil. And it's totally like, to the degree we understand the Man in Black, this is his objective, is to break this guy down and bring him down to his level. Yeah.
Yeah. And I really love, like that do you say so doesn't come remarked upon, because like we have, it's kind of a 3-beat, right? We have when he says Yar and Roland reacts shocked. When he says the nursery rhyme about the fire, Roland reacts shocked. And here he does another Rolandism, and Roland has no reaction this time.
Yeah.
None, because he's decoupled.
Yeah.
He's ceased to see him as a person anymore. And so he has no reaction to that Rolandism. And it's devastating.
Yeah,
oh my gosh.
He's distanced himself. Yeah.
Roland, don't do it,
man.
buddy.
I know.
So we're here at the end. And we look back on these 2 chapters, and we've continued to understand Roland's past. We've made a lot of progress through this hunt for the Man in Black, but these chapters are really just the story of Roland and Jake, the lone wolf and his cub, a story of how they came together and how Ka, and I put that in quotes, eventually drives them apart. Roland goes from he's afraid of this boy, to loving him, and to finally casting him aside as an impersonality to be moved and used. It is incredible. Like I love these chapters because it's so heartbreaking. Like it's just the quickness with which you love Jake, this innocent child who never did anything, was just cast as a pawn in this game, and it's now going to be sacrificed.
Yeah, and it's a very cool sleight of hand that the book has pulled on us, because now we like Roland, right? Like we've seen his humanity a lot more than we did in chapter 1. We've seen his childhood, we've seen his struggles, we've seen him love this kid. So now when King kind of then rips that away from us, it hurts a lot more than it would if this rather cold and human character from chapter 1 had done the same thing, which, I mean, frankly, he does do basically the same thing at the end of chapter 1 when he shoots Allie. But it doesn't hurt this much because you don't really know him yet. So it makes me wonder where we're going from here, because I mean, I don't know how many of these yo-yos I can take before I just kind of lose patience with this guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It is great. And I mean, it's such a complicated examination of this guy. And I mean, you want to like him. Like, he's set up to be the badass gunslinging hero, and the book is really pushing you on that. It's like, even me, like, I've read this book so many times and I'm still finishing this chapter with like, man, fuck this guy.
Yeah.
Like, seriously.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're absolutely supposed to feel that way. So
Yeah. All right. Well, that is the end of chapter 3, The Oracle and the Mountain. And so we've got 2 chapters left in this book, and we'll be covering them next week. But we got to move into some closing episode stuff. So first, do you have any new speculations for me, Matt?
Oh, shoot. I should have collated things that I said offhand during the episode.
Yeah, they're mixed in the episode.
Yeah, they're
we'll get a handle on this as we go forward.
Yeah, as we go forward, we might, if I get Mac together, maybe we'll make one of those spreadsheets with all the predictions.
We should do that.
Okay, cool.
All right, so TBD on Matt's speculations.
Okay.
Also TBD on the phrase for Matt's speculations, because we got to get some alliteration going there.
Absolutely, yeah. We're putting it up for a vote.
Yeah. So as far as our audience discussion, last week we asked all you guys, if you've read the Dark Tower series, without spoiling anything, tell us why you love the book so much. And if you are new, like Matt, to the series, what'd you think of chapter 1? So we got a few responses. Thank you all those who sent those in. For future reference, you can send them in. We have a Doof Media Discord. That's reddit.com/r/doofmedia. You can email us at kingslingerspod@gmail.com. Or you can comment on YouTube. Or there's actually a way to comment on the Doof Media website. There's a comment section there. So if you want to comment there, tons of ways to comment, to send in the answers to these questions.
Yeah.
First of all, we have Vivian, who she is a constant reader and longtime King lover, and she wrote a really beautiful answer here. I really like this, saying this was an incredibly difficult question for me to answer. Sorry, Vivian. She says, I think I love The Dark Tower because it is the definitive King story. If I had to pin King's work, I wouldn't call what he does horror, but rather I feel like King's books are at their core character studies. Everything from his straight horror novels like Carrie to his epics like The Stand to his crime novels like Mr. Mercedes. At their core are deep character studies on their subjects, why people act like they do, their capacity for good, for evil, and their inability to overcome their own traumas and change. People often say that King can't write good endings. That's debatable depending on the novel. I agree, Vivian. Or that he has problems with getting lost in his plots and having things blow up literally and metaphorically to get things going. But his character work is top notch. A King fan, when you listen to them gush, tend to gush over who they love or love to hate versus individual plot points. The Dark Tower is, in my mind, the pinnacle of this feat. The series focus on Roland and other characters I am extraordinarily excited for Matt to meet, and their psychology and their growth is what makes the series one that I like to return to time after time. I love that, and I agree with all of it.
That makes me happy because I am on record as saying that to me, being a writer and being a good psychologist are the same thing. And I mean, I know King well enough to know that he is good at the psychology. And even just in these first 3 chapters we've read, he has demonstrated that he is a master of this. And so this is my favorite kind of writing. And I can't wait to read more of it.
Great.
Deep Scorn Prisoner says, I had read a few King books when I was an adolescent, but reading the Dark Tower series is what transformed me into a true Stephen King fan. The richness of the setting and the characters is what I love about these books. Alternating between science fiction, fantasy, horror, and Western tropes with a fantastic cast of characters is what I think makes these books some of my favorite of any genre.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, a similar sentiment, right? The idea that it's the characters and of course, the setting, which, I mean, like, I probably almost maybe to the point of repetitiveness talked about how kind of enamored I am and fascinated and full of questions I am about this setting that he's put forth, much more than usual, I would say. Like usually in a fantasy book, you're pretty quickly like, okay, I get it. Yep, it's fantasy world. There's this kind of monster, this kind of magic, I get it. But here he's kind of maintained a sense of mystery pretty deep into the book, actually.
Yeah, and King at his best, when he creates a setting, loves to flesh it out and make it feel alive. Like if he's going to make a town, you're going to learn everything about that town. Mm-hmm. You're going to learn how the town works. You're going to learn the history of the town. You're going to learn the different people in the town and what the existence and the success or failure of those people in that town means about the town itself. And I think that is something that's absolutely true for Dark Tower as well. So
cool.
All right, Samara says, it's the fact that I simply love most of Stephen King's books. Me too. But the series really stands out. Among those reasons for this is that it takes place on a large scale and involves big ideas and events while still maintaining that intimate relationship that King is able to create between the reader and the book's characters. Sometimes when books zoom out too much, turning the spotlight on events on a grander scale, it loses track of these things, and characters become secondary rather than the focus. Longer works also give one time to really delve into the characters' lives and get to know them more deeply, in a sense. Yeah, I agree. And look, these are 3 constant readers, Matt. And what has each one of them said? Character.
Well, great. Perfect. Yeah, cool. I continuing to be excited. Mm-hmm. Seloween says, the first time reading it, glad I could go through the podcast with you guys. Found myself saying what the hell out loud several times with the first part, which very rarely happens when I read. Good sign.
Yes, yeah. Very good sign.
Yeah, I mean, me too, right? It's just any time that a book gets an emotional reaction out of me, I'm like, yeah, this is why I read.
Yeah, totally. Kippos also answers saying, never read Dark Tower before. First chapter was incredibly strange. I really enjoyed the way King built up the world as something that is completely alien, yet internally consistent. The more I sit on this, the less I like Roland as a person. He's clearly a fascinating character, and I am excited to continue with him, but the huge misogynistic vibes he literally throws around are pretty yikes. Aside from that, weird chapter, but certainly a good one. Excited to learn more and experience this epic tale. Yeah, I understand your feelings of Roland, and I'm not sure, Kippos, if you wrote this before or after you finished these first 2 chapters, and I'm kind of curious what you think now, which almost moved us into our discussion question. Really good. We got one more answer, but then we'll move into that.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to comment like we doing kind of shows like this where we cover books in detail. There's this interesting phenomenon we've noticed where you and I will sort of like or dislike certain characters more or less than average on the basis of like having reread and taken notes on it, and it like provides a kind of distance and different lens on the character. I will say that even after kind of digging into these chapters, I still I find Roland to be so fascinating and well drawn and like relatable that I can't hate him because I just he's too relatable to hate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know what you
mean. But I think that's great. Sanity 0004 says, I love Dark Tower for the characters and all the huge character moments we get over the series.
Well, that's 4 constant readers, Matt, and the word character was in each one of them. Yeah, I mean, you have just begun to scratch the surface of these characters, Matt. There are so many more, and they're so great, and I can't wait for you to meet them all. That's some of the best characters I've ever read, really, honestly.
Cool.
So.
I mean, I already feel like we've had some of what I would call great character moments, and we're only starting, really.
Yeah. So this week's discussion question related to Kippos's answer to the last one was, at this point of the story, after 3 chapters, do you like Roland? And if yes, why? If not, why not? Why don't you like Roland anymore?
Yeah.
Or why do you still like Roland? I'm really curious about that because I think King wants you to be questioning this.
Yeah. I look forward to people's answers on this one because I am so like up in the air about it right now, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, you can send those questions in via the YouTube video that this podcast will be on, the website, doofmedia.com, our email account, that's kingslingerspod@gmail.com, or on there will be a post for this episode on our subreddit, that's r/doofmedia. So any of those places, feel free to submit questions, and we'll pull from all those.
Cool.
All right, Matt, we're going to do a little bit of Stephen King News Corner because it's a great time to be a Stephen King fan, and I figure there's some Stephen King news stuff to talk about. Some of it is Dark Tower related, so we'll do this every so often. It kind of dates the episode, so I don't want to do it too often. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I like talking about Stephen King, so I'm going to do it.
Let's do it.
So there was a Dark Tower movie. You remember that. We try to forget it. We try really hard, but
and I never watched it, so
that was a good call.
So don't worry about it.
This is a good call. It's real bad, and it would have made you very unexcited for this whole project. So I'm glad you didn't watch it.
Okay.
But there was going to be a Dark Tower television show. Amazon ordered a pilot. The pilot was shot. It was made. It was put together. It was presented to Amazon, and Amazon said, "No, thanks." So we're not going to get a Dark Tower TV show right now. I believe the creators of the pilot are shopping it around to see if anyone else wants to pick it up, but I suspect it's going to be an expensive show to produce. So I don't know the odds of it happening at this point. But right now we're just kind of in limbo again, where this adaptation is not going forward. So it's kind of a bummer. I think TV is the only way to do this story. As we saw with the movie, it's just a bad idea. It was so bad, Matt. When we finish this project, I'm going to make you watch the movie and just to suffer with.
Sure. Now I'm sort of curious now because like even just the snippets that I remember from the trailer, I'm just like, oh, that's just the wrong tone entirely.
Yup.
Yeah.
Yup. So that is the Dark Tower adaptation. We will, if we ever see more news about that, I think we'll make sure we discuss it on this show because I think it's exciting. But the other thing I wanted to talk about is another Stephen King adaptation. In 2014, Stephen King wrote a book called The Outsider. It is a kind of crime mystery horror story that goes along with the Mr. Mercedes style of books that Vivian mentioned in her answer. And I really liked the book. I enjoyed it a lot. I think it was one of King's better books in the last few years. And HBO optioned it into a series, and 3 episodes have been released so far, and they're knocking it out of the park, Matt. It's really, really good. And if anyone has hesitated to check out The Outsider on HBO yet, please do it. It's so good.
Awesome.
So I don't want to spoil it or anything, but the basic concept is this man murders this little boy, but he's like, no, I did not do that. I'm totally innocent. And all the DNA evidence says that he was the one that did it. But then they get a very clear alibi, like videotaped alibi, to show that he was not in the town the day the murder happened. And so it's like, what do you do in a police procedural when nothing is making sense, when all the evidence points towards someone, but it also can't be them? What do you do? And it explores that central idea. And in the Stephen King way, the characters are all great, and it is really channeling King in a lot of great ways. So check out The Outsider on HBO.
Sounds great.
Scott approved.
All right. Great. Stamp of Scott approval. Good.
There we go. All right. That is it for us here on Kingslingers. We will be back next week with a new episode discussing Chapter 4, The Slow Mutants, and Chapter 5, The Gunslinger and the Man in Black, the final chapter of Book 1, The Gunslinger.
Awesome. Yeah. Remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod at gmail.com. I'm going to read that again. kingslingerspod at gmail.com, or on Twitter at doofmedia.
And if you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we strongly recommend you do so you can be sure to be notified every time we have a new episode, which should be every Thursday morning. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and literally everywhere. I think that's the big ones, but all the little ones take off of the big ones. So like if there's a podcasting platform, we should be on there. We had some problems with Pocket Casts earlier. It's on there. It's just their search function sucks. So sorry for those of you having trouble with Pocket Casts, but if you I forget how you do this. If you like go to Google and type Pocket Casts, it's so stupid. I hate that you have to do this, but go to Google, like type Pocket Casts, Kingslingers, search. It might come up. I hate it. I hate it.
Some of these services are just clearly worse than others, to the point where I just want to be like, no, don't. We're not on that one.
But I mean, we technically are. It's there. Yeah. You just can't find it.
No, fuck Pocket Casts.
The thing is, I think that's one that costs money too. So it's really disappointing.
Yeah, that's weird. Yeah. Some of them. Yeah. Anyway, I don't use Pocket Casts. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but anyway, if you like any of our shows here on the Doof Media Network, like the Doofcast that me and Scott run, where we talk about different things, like we're talking about director David Fincher these last few weeks. Mm-hmm. We've got some of our Wild Bill related content, and we've got a writing podcast called Do the Right Thing, a writing prompt podcast where they give you 4 random words, and you try to write a short story using those words within 30 minutes. And it's a fantastic exercise. And I think that, I don't know, I feel like people who read Stephen King, there might be a disproportionate number of writers amongst y'all. So
I think especially the ones that listen to people talk about Stephen King for 2 hours a week might like writing and be writers. So
so check that out, and check out their subreddit and everything, r/do the right thing, right with a R, with a WRITE.
Yeah, and you can find that show and all our shows at our website at doofmedia.com. Click on that podcast button, and each and every one of our shows will be right there for you to check out.
Yeah, if you like our shows and you want to support them, consider donating at patreon.com/doofmedia, and you can donate $1 a month or whatever else you can afford. Supporting us on Patreon gives you tons of great bonuses, like voting in fan art and costume contests that we hold sometimes, hangout sessions with the Doof crew on YouTube, and access to live streams of our recording sessions sometimes, as well as an excellent Discord channel.
Yeah. And first of all, as we close the show, I just want to say thank you again for everyone who took the time to leave a rating and a review on iTunes or wherever else. We do this thing at the end of all our shows where we read any new reviews. I've got enough for like the next 20 weeks. So thanks for that, everyone. Today's Spotlight review is going to come from D. Dejevsky, who says, 5 stars, starting a new journey. I've enjoyed listening to Matt and Scott's analysis as a way to enjoy content I love through a new lens. I love the show too, even though I've never read the Dark Tower series. I'm excited to see what it's like to experience the story this way. Thank you so much. I'm excited too. So Thank you for leaving that review, and thank you everyone for leaving your reviews. And we will get to you, I promise. I can't read them like all at once because it would take another 20 minutes. No, listen to that. But we will feature your review, and keep sending them in. Seriously, we're past the first week here, but it still is important. So please keep sending them in.
Yeah, I mean, it feels really good to start off this series with this vote of confidence because when we started our other podcast, our last one, we didn't start out with this much support.
Yeah, that's very, very true. We love you guys. Thank you so much. And that's it for us this week. So we'll see you back here next week for chapters 4 and 5 of The Gunslinger. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.